Hello everyone and welcome to this video on Business Ethics Foundations. This is going to be a relatively short video where we just run through some of the basic questions surrounding business ethics as a field and a type of study. So we are going to look at what business ethics actually is, and that includes a look at the broader field of ethics itself and also why it's so important for individuals, organizations and broader society now more than ever, as well as some of the major tensions within business ethics as a field. So if we start with the central question of ethics and what is ethics, well, it's a branch of philosophy concerned with questions of morality and in particular right and wrong. So it can be defined a number of different ways, but I think this fundamental understanding of ethics as trying to distinguish and understand what right actions and wrong actions are is a good one to have in our minds. In a broader sense, ethics really does seek to try and question and resolve issues of human morality. So what morals are, what the correct morals are, with associated concepts such as good and evil, virtue and vice. So the ancient Greeks in particular were very concerned with what it actually is to live a virtuous life, so what it is to live a good life, as well as questions of justice, right and wrong, and so on as well. We have two major branches of ethics that we're concerned with here. So one is normative ethics, so that's trying to understand how one should act, so how an individual or society should function, so what the normative ethics and the normative values should be. And as well as that, there's applied ethics. So that's a discipline of philosophy trying to apply ethical theory to real life situations to understand what the right action or the wrong action is in any given situation. We do here have to make a distinction between ethics and law. Because oftentimes when we think about what the right action and the wrong action is in any given situation, we often have in our minds what the legal or illegal action is. So we tend to instinctively judge actions by whether they're legal or illegal. So, for example, if someone was to ask you whether murder was right or wrong, ethically okay or unethical, we'd tend to automatically reach for murder is wrong. And one of the primary thoughts in our minds may well be, well, murder is illegal, it will be punished, so therefore it can't be a correct or ethical action to do. Now, there is significant interplay and overlap in some cases between ethics and law, but they are fundamentally different areas of study. They are different fields. And that's essentially because law is a body of rules and regulations which labels some actions as permissible within society and other actions as impermissible. So the actions that are deemed to be impermissible, that is to say outside the law or illegal, can be punished through fines, imprisonment and other penalties. So when we consider law, we have to understand that it is fundamentally a part of the political system. It's part of the system of political governance over a particular country or territory. So when we try to understand law, we have to recognize that law is mediated through power. So whether it's power centers within a society, mediated through political power, financial, economic power, knowledge power, all of these things really are embedded in the very fabric of the law. So we cannot understand law to be the pursuit of trying to understand what's right or wrong. Instead, law should be understood as the body of laws or rules and regulations that are imposed as part of a political system and come with all of the associated concerns and baggage that political governance systems have. Another way that we can understand the difference between ethics and law is looking at all the cases where we can deem some actions to be ethical and yet illegal, or unethical and yet legal. So there's lots of situations where we can clearly draw a distinction between ethical actions and legal actions. So we can consider situations where most people would agree that legal systems and rules and regulations around apartheid in South Africa Jim Crow laws in the 1950s and 60s in the South of the United States, Section 28, which was a series or a homophobic anti-LGBT law in the UK in the 80s, are not ethically acceptable, and yet they were very much valid legal systems at the time that were accepted by the large part of the societies that they ruled over, as well as recognized by other states and other countries. So we have clear situations in the recent past where you had laws that criminalize certain behavior or impose certain behavior that were not necessarily ethical. We also have the reverse. I think there's quite a few situations where you can make the argument that certain actions are ethical and yet they are illegal. So whether that's something related to, say, copyright infringement in certain cases, you can make the argument around vaccine knowledge and patents, HIV medication and patents, and to breach those laws is undoubtedly illegal within a straightforward reading of the laws, but certainly there is an argument to be made that they are still ethical actions. The other thing that we have to understand, as we've said before, business and power interests and various other interests can and do impact legislative bodies. So we can't understand law as even the collective understanding of what's ethical and not ethical. That's not how legislative bodies function in reality. So there would be a mistake to see ethics as our personal understanding of right and wrong and law as the collective understanding of right and wrong. You could make that argument, but you would have to acknowledge the outsized influence of certain interests within society when drafting and passing laws. And we also have to recognize that laws are not always applied in an even-handed or ethically acceptable manner. So that too further distinguishes ethics as the philosophy of what's right and wrong against law, or the classification of certain actions as legal or illegal. Now, we've been talking about ethics as a general field, as a general philosophy, but we are going to focus in on business ethics. Now, business ethics in the simplest of terms is essentially just a branch of applied ethics within a business context. So we're looking at trying to understand what ethical actions are. So what is a correct or right action versus what's a wrong action within a particular business context. It can relate to individuals functioning within a business, or it can relate to how the business itself functions. So it's essentially just applied ethics within the business context as a nice simple way of drawing a line between ethics as a broader philosophy and ethics in this very particular context. That does give rise to a few major questions that we should consider when we're looking at business ethics. So two major questions that we should pose ourselves is the question, firstly, that do businesses themselves have an obligation to behave according to defined ethical standards? I.e., do businesses only have an obligation to obey the law, or do they also have an obligation, an ethical obligation, to consider their actions within a particular ethical standard? That's a question which, again, you can have different perspectives on, but is really at the heart of business ethics as a particular branch of applied ethics. The second question relates not to businesses, but rather individuals within a business. So do people working in a business have an obligation to behave to their own personal ethical standards, or are they effectively not reliable, ethically speaking, for actions which the business instructs them to do? So if someone is given an instruction by their line manager within an organization, and the consequences are that they'll be fired, or there'll be some other kind of negative consequence for them, do they still have an obligation to behave ethically? Do they still have an obligation to consider their own personal ethical standards? Now, neither of these questions are abstract questions. They should be very real questions for everyone working within the business field. I mean, for the first question about the obligation that businesses have or don't have, really we can see this in multiple situations throughout recent history and across the world. So you have high profile examples of the complicity of IBM, International Business Machines, in setting up some of the infrastructure within the German state during the Second World War, and the use of some of that infrastructure in the Holocaust, which was perfectly legal within the legal system of Germany at the time. But that's a big, high-profile, eye-catching example. You have lots of other smaller examples as well. So the obligation that businesses may have to behave to ethical standards when operating in not just countries such as, so again, you've got eye-catching examples such as businesses operating in China with regards to data capture and complicity with state surveillance systems, but also the exact same issues coming to light in the US, the UK, and Western Europe, and other traditionally global North countries when it comes to programs like Five Eyes and other Snowden-related revelations. So these are very real issues. And when it comes to the second question, again, very real issues that people working within all kinds of businesses may often come up with a conflict between the instructions they receive by their line managers or by senior management and their own personal ethical standards. Now, there is quite clearly there's lots of interesting ethical frameworks and theories such as utilitarianism, Kantism, so lots of interesting stuff to dig into, but we can also consider our own personal ethical belief systems, which may not be formalized or given a huge amount of thought to, but they often still exist. We often still have an instinctive sense of right and wrong, which we can consider and reflect on. So if we just take a moment to consider what kind of influences we have as individuals and what kind of ethical impulses we have within our own makeup, we can see that there's lots of different things that would influence our understanding of right and wrong. So some of this may be formalized to a degree. So one that comes to mind would be religion, but we have to be careful about giving too much credence to the idea that religion can form the bulk of our ethical makeup, simply because just on reflecting on human nature and vast differences between people's actions within ethical dilemmas around the world, religion clearly doesn't give us a set of programming code to decide what we believe is right or wrong. It can absolutely have an influence, but we have to understand that religious theology is often mediated through other things such as our family upbringing, our friends and peer network, media influence, and even schooling, rather than just taking, say, the Old Testament or the Quran and just dumping it to someone's brain and they'll behave in a certain way. Religion itself is highly contested, lots of different interpretations, and those are formal interpretations of ethical belief systems within a single religious tradition. And then you have all of the diversity of people's individual experiences, their own personalities, their own instincts, which further dilutes the influence of religion. So we should understand that media, family, friends, all of these things also have a very, very significant impact on our personal ethical belief systems. So with that, we are going to move on to our second question that we posed about why it's important to consider ethical issues, or even the ethical dimensions of issues we face within the business field. And there are three major sources of tension that I think it's wise to highlight when trying to understand why ethics really should be placed at the heart of how we understand major business decisions and major business issues. So the first would be the wider importance of ethics to human societies and to human habitation of the earth. So we're facing a very clear climate crisis that's potentially going to have catastrophic consequences on the planet, and therefore our ability to survive on the planet itself. So the question of environmental impact of our business activities is one that goes beyond just reckoning with what is legal and what isn't legal, or our own short-term profit motives or short-term consequences, positive or negative, for certain actions. Ethics gives us a framework to consider these kinds of issues and allows us to consider the wider impact of business activities and business decisions. As well as this, and we also have the idea of personal importance as well when it comes to ethical imperatives or ethical dilemmas. So if you're compromising your personal morality in order to continue to remain employed, and ultimately for usually the financial gain of the employer, then is this an acceptable state of affairs? Is it acceptable for us to have a personal belief system or a personal ethical system of ethics that we lay aside when it could actually have a significant impact on the world, simply because we have an interest in the financial gain of certain actions, or we wish to remain employed within that particular job? Again, a central tension that is worth exploring and reflecting on. And lastly, social importance would be another necessary or important tension, which has been brought out to light quite starkly in things like the Black Lives Matter protests, the movement for trans rights, the movement against racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, lots of major social trends at the moment in existence. So recognizing that the old aphorism that no man is an island, so our actions are connected to both local communities, national communities, and through processes of globalization and technology through global communities. So therefore our actions within the business sphere also have important wider impacts on society as well.